The most widely published book in human history reveals that we are created in the image of God. Throughout our human journey, each encounter is an opportunity to see the shared humanity in ourselves and others. Regardless of one's views on religion, each experience and each story weaves us together towards a common path. A path of transformation, a process of growth and understanding, a recognition that, at our core, we share a common destiny. What does the search for truth really mean in our lives? How can we find a sense of unity in a world so diverse and divided? As we reflect on these questions, we start to uncover a fundamental connection that binds us all beyond our differences. Welcome to Created in the Image of God, Building Vibrant Communities, with our host, Wade Franson. Tonight's episode is Raising Other People's Children.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Created in the Image of God. I'm your host, Wade Franson, and we have an exciting show tonight that is really focused on families, children, and parents, and the way that this is changing in society today. We have somebody who is both an expert in practical terms and also professionally, who has walked the walk of what the title is, Raising Other People's Children, because she has both been a foster parent in many different circumstances, but also on the legal side of the issue of protecting children. Welcome to the studio, Debbie Ausburn.
Thank you very much.
Now, we connected a few weeks ago, and I can't remember exactly what it was that was the initial, but I know that the fact that I come from a fractured family and have step sisters and some things that have been going on in my life made it very interesting for me to talk to you on a personal level. And I thought, well, this is really something that is worth sharing out with our audience and with our guests. So we always like to dive into the early childhood experiences and that, but let's start by talking about who you are now, both your credentials in terms of on the professional side as an attorney and what you've done there, but also just to give the audience a little bit of a sense of who you are today, and then we'll go back into how you got there.
All right. I make my living as a lawyer. I am a litigator, trial lawyer, but I'm moving now into more advice. I have developed a niche working with youth organizations, and how I got here. Sort of, we'll back up and talk about how I got here, but it's sort of the culmination of a lot of volunteer work and prior jobs and things that I've done in my life that have given me a window into working with youth organizations and helping them. And so I'm working with them now on how to avoid litigation, how to set up strong policies that help them keep the kids safe that they're dealing with. And then in my personal life, I've never had biological children, but through foster parenting and being a step parent, I've collected 7 kids and 10 grandkids. So that's I joke that I make my living as a lawyer, but what I do is raise other people's children.
Well, we're going to get into that a lot more deeply, but first let's talk about you as a child, right? So where do you hail from? Where were your parents? What were they doing when you were but a glimmer in their eye kind of thing? And then what were the early childhood experiences that you had?
Well, I grew up in North Georgia, Deliverance Country, if anyone has ever seen that movie. So it's up in the northeast corner of the state, very close to South Carolina and North Carolina, up in the Georgia mountains there. My parents they both grew up in the area. My mom grew up in Athens, which is a college town. Her parents were mill workers there in the town. My dad grew up on a farm in North Georgia. My My mom was she was the city mouse because of coming from Athens. And so my brother and sister and I'm the oldest child. We grew up in a really sort of ordinary family. Our parents had a functioning marriage and a functioning family, and my um, sister and brother and I are, they're my best friends. They and my husband now, but we've always been a pretty close family. My mom and dad were always very involved with youth ministries in our church, and they were, for various reasons, drawn to, back then we call them at-risk kids, the kids from broken homes, from single parent families. And I did a lot of, as the oldest daughter, I did a lot of working with them in those ministries. Actually, all three of us did, my brother and my sister and I. And so that's where I sort of learned about the problems that kids were facing in society. And my mom and dad both worked in the correctional system. I joke that I grew up going in and out of juvenile detention centers as a child because I would visit mom and dad there. And then when I graduated from college, it was sort of a natural extension to go into the juvenile justice system. I didn't work in the detention centers, but I worked as a caseworker in juvenile court after college. So I've just have a lifelong experience working with kids in camps. My dad had a summer camp for a week every summer. Take a lot of the kids in the area up to a camp near us and spend a week there. So I helped put that together and helped supervise it. And my sister and I were the lifeguards. So just a lot of family involvement in ministry that involved kids.
So is it, not to oversimplify, but is it fair to say, you kind of, you're following in the family business, but you're taking it to a new level in that you probably saw there were probably maybe some close calls, or maybe actually some of your family members got caught in a situation like we did last summer. We've been running a summer camp program, Hillcrest Orchard Camp, and so situation came up where we became exposed to a legal complaint that was, in our view, completely unwarranted, right?
Right. Yeah.
um I won't go into any detail here, but it occurs to me that those who do have a heart to want to help those at-risk children, right? uh, I have that because of my own experiences as a child and wanting to see that that doesn't happen to other people and that they have opportunities and whatnot. But that desire to do good is hampered by the fact that there's a lot of bad, and it can come back and bite good people.
Yes, it can. We were fortunate. I didn't see those problems until I became a lawyer. All of the ministries that I worked in, either we um, were fortunate in that we didn't have any predators, or we were oblivious and just didn't know. It's hard to look back in hindsight and say one
Well,
way or the
and
other.
I feel like now I have to share some detail because people's imaginations run wild. This was a situation where somebody claimed an employment relationship that didn't exist,
Right,
um, and
right.
then claimed an illness um, that then would qualify for workman's
Workers'
compensation.
comp. Right. Yes.
And there was a
Yes.
parent involved who perhaps saw an opportunity there to exploit a weakness, right? So it wasn't anything really dark other than maybe just greed and selfishness.
It's just routine issues dealing with people these days. Yes, I
Right.
see that a lot, a lot with my clients. I saw some of this when I was a caseworker with juvenile court, but I will say I only lasted 4 years in that job, I burned out. I got tired of dipping out the ocean with a teaspoon,
Yep.
and I retreated to law school. I had been a debater in college, um, and I discovered law as it, it, I discovered that my arguing with people could be a skill set instead of a character flaw. And that so it was an excellent match for my personality.
Well, but
Um,
based on your demeanor, I don't see you as argumentative, right? So there's that. There's just probably seeking clarity, right?
right. Well, see, wait, that's because you're agreeing with me. You haven't seen me when you tell me something I don't want to hear.
Right.
So,
Well, so at dinner tonight, um, my wife was at she's a doctor of physical therapy. She was at some community event regarding human resources, and there was a small business owner, there was a pastor, and some others, and they were talking about young people today, and the word privilege came up, right? And they were contrasting privilege with lower income, and so I at the family dinner table with our 14-year-old son, I said, well, let's talk about those words. Is if we say on the one hand you have privilege and on the other hand you have lower income, um, you can see how those would seem to be apples to apples. But I asked, is that really an apple to apple comparison? And what about the term entitlement? And then I said, well, is privilege on the one hand and entitlement on the other? Absolutely not, because entitlement could be felt whether you're lower income or upper income. You follow me?
right.
You can feel entitled on
Yes.
either side.
Yes.
So when we have these discussions, because I hate the use of the word privilege, I just hate it. I despise it because of the way it's applied, partially because as a high school student, I lived in a tent in Alaska my senior year to get through high school. But because I'm a white male and I'm relatively successful today, people use that word around me a lot. And the implication is that I am privileged. You follow me? And
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
maybe
Yes.
some aspects of that are true. And I'm down a rabbit hole, but I think defining terms, and we'll get into this in the next segment. I know I'm off point, but where I'm going with this is we talked about how it takes a village to raise a child. And
Hmm.
society is changing and the nature of the village is changing,
Hmm.
right? Some of the problems and challenges that we had many years ago were with children and keeping children safe and protecting them. Today, they're exposed in many different ways than they were back then, but it doesn't mean it didn't happen back then. Society's changing, and the tools and methods that we need to use must change along with it.
It is. I think the children were exploited before. There were, I mean, just child labor. And my I'm not sure my grandparents graduated from high school because they had to quit and go to work in order to support the family. So my parents' generation in my family was the first one to go to high school, and my generation is the first one to get graduate degrees. So um, there were a lot of things that were hard for folks, but in many ways they were more privileged than kids today because they had intact families.
Right.
And,
Is it a
we've got
privilege to have a
kids.
two-parent family?
Yes, exactly.
And if you
Exactly.
have a two-parent family, are you privileged in a negative sense?
Right. Yes. Yeah, I could go down this rabbit hole with you. Soapbox number 342.
Right.
Um, but the kids that I have fostered and parented over the years, it is very easy for them to fall into this trap that we have in our society of, being a victim as currency. And that's like one of my kids told me one time, and I think I wrote about this in my book, Raising Other People's Children. I was telling one of my foster kids, you need to study. So if you say you want to go to college, but you have to get good grades in order to get into college. And the response was, no, no, no. I've got enough victim points. I can write a great essay my dad deserted us, my mom was a drug addict, and now I'm ending up living with you old people who don't understand me. So I'll be able to count up my victim points and get into college. It didn't work out that well, but I was just struck by the sense of I can get where I want to go by counting up victim points. I mean, that was actually the
Well,
the
and
the phrase.
the really sad thing there is that, and if it had worked, then you get there and you're not prepared, right?
Right,
And then does the
right,
institution coddle or accommodate that lack of preparation, that lack of diligence? And what does
right.
that do overall to the village that we're trying to create, in which children can be raised safely?
Well, it's sort of the contrary of resilience, and that's a big part of my work now with kids, is looking at the things that we can do and that we can put in place to create resilience for them and help them be more resilient because bad things happen. My second book, Protecting Other People's Children, is all about um, protecting the kids in our care. But I know as a foster parent and as a volunteer and working with various organizations, kids come to us with bad things that have happened to them that were out of our control. And so now a big part of my work is how to get them from where they are to where they can be.
Yeah. Well, that looks like a good point to go to our first commercial break, which is actually a brief video about you and your work. Don't go
Okay.
anywhere. We'll be right back with more of Debbie Ausburn. We've already opened up a number of cans of worms that we will investigate with glee when we come back.
Every child deserves a place where they feel seen, safe, and supported. Those who guide children also carry the responsibility to protect them. Written by two legal experts with over 60 years of experience, this essential resource helps organizations build strong child protection policies, recognize risks, train the right people, and respond when it matters most. From schools to churches to mentoring programs, this is a blueprint for real protection, made practical, sustainable, and clear. Protecting Other People's Children. A powerful tool for those who choose to care. Available now at Amazon.
Welcome back to Creating the Image of God. I mean, that ad says it all as to why we have you on this show. We are reaching out. We have many pastors and religious folks in our audience. This is a bit different of a topic than what we often have on the show. But it's necessary, right? I remember in the corporate world, we had this safety training guy come in. He's a former firefighter,
Yeah, yeah,
and his thing was predictable, preventable, predictable, preventable. If it's predictable, it's preventable. Right? If it's predictable, it's preventable, right?
incredible.
So sadly, some of these things are predictable, and you're saying they are preventable. But unfortunately, the problem is we don't often know that it's predictable. It should have been predictable that somebody's going to take this little benefit that we had, which is we gave a little bit of a stipend to help cover some of the expenses that our volunteers would
Right.
have. And that was turned into somehow an employment relationship when there was, and
Been there.
no good
Had
deed
that
goes
fight.
unpunished, right? So I should have known. We should have known that exposure was not something we wanted to take on with our little program, and it was predictable, but we didn't predict it because we were ignorant.
Right. Right. Yeah. And it happens a lot. I'll give you an example to come into an example that I see often. One of the most important things, according to the studies, in helping kids be resilient, the factor that shows up first and second in study after study after study, is having a mentor, which is a trusted adult outside the family that invests in this child. And so, as foster parents, I like to say we can be that mentor. Step parents, I'm not my, as I have said to my kids a lot, I'm not your mother, but you are my children. So we can be that trusted adult. However, when you look at all the characteristics of mentors, and then you look at the list, the characteristics of people who are grooming children for abuse, those two lists can overlap like a Venn diagram. And so you have to understand the characteristics that make grooming unique and different from mentoring in order to protect the kids in your program, because we want to encourage mentoring. We want to encourage relationships with good adults. Um, but then we also have to be aware and watch for the things that make it dangerous for kids. So that's an example of um, well-meaning people. And understand, I love, one of the reasons I love working with youth organizations and foster parents and all of these other folks is because they really are wonderful people. They are much nicer than I am. They are much nicer than any of the lawyers I work with, and I just love working with them. But their very heart and caring can be used against them because they just don't understand how bad people think.
Right. Yep. So, tell us a little bit about the personal side. I'm seeing some of the chat questions come in here. Tell us a little bit about, maybe the lessons learned about being that foster parent and the dynamic of modern families.
Okay. Well, one of the things you have to understand with raising other people's children, I start my book off with this, is from the kid's perspective, we are not the people who are supposed to be in their lives. Kids have a basic desire, it's almost primal, very subconscious desire to have their biological family together. And so, no matter how wonderful we are, no matter how much we love them, no matter how much they bond with us, um, they would still, there's a story I tell often of after my marriage, my husband's ex-wife filed for custody of, my husband had custody of the two youngest kids. And she filed for custody, and we were talking to the youngest kid, trying to get his sense of did he want to move or not. And he wasn't saying anything. He wasn't going to say anything that sounded like he was taking sides. And we didn't want him to take sides. We just didn't want
Right.
to waste a lot of money on something that he didn't want. So my husband finally asked him, said, let me ask it this way. If you had a magic wand, what would your life look like? And he didn't hesitate. He said, well, if I had a magic wand, you and mom would be back together.
Right.
And there was this pause, and then he looked over at me and he said, no insult, Debbie, you and the dogs would be right next door. And
How
so
old was
now
he at that time?
he was 12. And so, I mean, and understand, we had bonded. We were really
Yeah.
close. And I didn't take it personally. I
Right.
understood that if he had his way in his world, I would be the nice neighbor lady next door with the dogs who fed him cookies, and
Yeah.
or the Sunday school teacher or something. I would still be in his life, but he has a mom, and so that was um, understanding that. Fortunately, I was a foster parent before I was a step parent, so I had worked through kids saying, "I hate you. You're not my mom," and
Yeah.
and responding and saying, I know I'm not your mom, and I'm sorry your mom's not here, and I'm here and I love you, and it's time to do the dishes and go to school. You know?
You
So
think your mom wouldn't make you do that?
that's right. That's right. Exactly. So, um,
But in our fantasy, right, we do,
right, right.
right, and
We do
kids
that,
are
and it just for whatever reason, marriages break up, blended families are reformed, kids end up in foster care, and it's an imperfect world, and we have to help them through that, and there's a lot of principles of I've learned with raising other people's children that my job is to help support the biological relationship, as much as I always made sure my kids had Mother's Day cards for their mom and birthday cards and all of those kind of things. Because that biological relationship is important, and I learned to support it in all the safe ways that I could, and that were allowed by the court plans. Sometimes with foster care, you don't have a lot of choices. Um, so there's just a lot of principles with that, and helping kids through, and we learn to make a one-way commitment to these kids. We understand they are not going to understand our sacrifice. They are not going to uh, they're kids. They're not going to be grateful, you know. Um, so we have to make that one-way commitment, and we have to have boundaries. So
one of the
I
things that we do in our family is we have thankful at dinner, at every meal. We have
oh, you're
thankful. We
right.
go around and you have to say one thing that you're thankful for. And it's like pulling teeth, right? And we keep
Oh yeah.
modeling the kinds of things, right, that we like to hear. Like, I'm thankful that, Caleb helped with the such and such today, right? To try to
Right.
bring other to build that relationship. And it's just one only hopes that the example will have been set and learned, but one doesn't really expect that it's fully grasped or
No.
appreciated or
Well, and to some extent, our job is to um, keep things behind the curtain. Because if kids, I mean, if they worry about whether or not the lights are going to stay on and whether or not there's going to be food in the cupboard and all of those adult kind of things,
you know,
we consider that a level of neglect and maltreatment. So, to
right?
some extent, the things that make their world the way it is are supposed to stay behind the curtain because they are just don't have the maturity to deal with it. And they're not going to be grateful for things until they're having to provide them to their children. Then they understand what we have done just because of life experience. And it's awfully hard with kids when you're stepping into the middle of their story and into their history of things that you weren't there for and didn't have any responsibility for. And sometimes the trauma is too deep. I spent a couple of decades. I really have kind of lost track of how many kids I fostered temporarily. I did a lot of emergency placements. I did a lot of respite care. I had a lot of short-term placements. I had two long-term placements, and then um, married a man with 5 kids, although 3 of the kids were adults by the time I married him. So it wasn't quite as scary as it seems. Um, and so, those are the 7 kids that we claim, and the relationship is really good with 5 of them. The other 2, they kind of come and go, and kids have agency. They make decisions, and you learn to say, um I'm like the father of the prodigal son, I'm here, you know where to find me.
Right.
So,
Well, I was thinking, it's funny. I was just thinking about the prodigal son because last week we had a woman on that's really her focus. And I think I may have shared with you my older sister died a little over a year ago of cancer, and then my younger sister died a little over a month ago in a motorcycle
Mm.
accident. She was on the
Oh,
motorcycle. She was a drunk driver.
that's awful. Right.
It was awful. And anyway, my sister was a troubled child herself. There's kind of a horrible irony that it was a drunk driver that killed her,
Oh,
because she was a recovering addict her whole life.
oh, yeah.
Um, so she was not my personal sort of prodigal son story came when I was 19, and I was in a high speed chase. I was the chasee, not the chaser, right? And I ran off the road at 120 miles an hour. Should have died, completely unharmed. Was in jail briefly, got out. Um, that's when I realized God was the prodigal father, because
Mhm.
I was a long way off. I wasn't being a good boy in that
Right.
high speed chase.
Right.
And yet
Right.
God's love was shown in the physical saving grace of when I really clearly should have died, was
Mhm.
completely unharmed. Well, here, my sister, I know that in the last few seconds of her life, her thoughts were of God as she
Mhm.
saw what was, how fast your mind can go in a
Right.
circumstance like that.
Yes.
As she realized what was happening in that, oh crap moment, I'm sure she was crying out to God in that moment. And that's when the prodigal father, the image of the father, this is going to bring tears to my eyes. The image of the father rushing towards her in that instant,
Mhm.
while she was yet a long way off. But in that moment, she turned towards the father, and the father rushed out to meet her and take her home. Now, that seems horribly sappy to me because I never sort of put things in those kinds of terms before, but it's very real now. It's
Mhm.
very real now to me.
Mhm.
That's a very real scenario, a very real understanding of that proverb.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I think those foster children who you maybe only had briefly, you had some impact. They may not have shown it, but in the end, it's we're trying to express that same love that the father has. Whatever they do with it is their business. And
Right.
we're all raising somebody else's children because they're all a gift from God, and we have
Mhm.
them only temporarily, whether they're our biological children or not.
Right. Right. Yes. And they are God's first, and that's it's hard for control freaks like me to to realize that and recognize it because, there's a tendency in Christian circles or parenting circles to treat raising kids like it's a recipe. You add 3 parts love and 2 parts patience and, bake it in a functioning family for 18 years and you get a grateful, wonderful kid. Sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't. It's not like to use another example. It's not like a machine where you can just move a sprocket this way and move a gadget that way, and you get everything all tuned up. Um, Relationships and families and people are we're just we're very messy. Original sin just wreaks havoc with all of us.
Well, allow me to share this. I've been thinking a lot about this. I've been studying the book of Genesis all my life, but the richness of it, you can never mine it to its full depth. But one of the things that occurred to me is, where it says that your pain will be in childbirth, or I will
Hmm.
greatly increase your pain in childbirth. Well, it occurred to me now a couple of years ago that the greatest pain that Eve experienced was seeing her older son kill her younger son.
Yeah,
No
yeah,
greater pain than that, right? So right from the get-go, you had this dysfunctional family. That's my point. Very dysfunctional. And the clear message is that it comes from deviating by even 1 degree from God's intent and saying, well, I'll figure this out on my own. But at the same time, it was always God's intent that we have to figure it out on our own. There was a certain degree of differentiation that God, in creating offspring, and the title of the show, Created in the Image of God, the act of procreating is differentiation, right? We now have something that is very much like us, but is not us.
Right.
And so,
Right.
so God differentiated consciousness, souls, whatever you want to say, to create this enormous diversity. And it was always his awareness and knowledge that it would be done differently by different people, for better or worse.
Mhm.
And there's this Baha'i quote that says, accustom your children to hardship. You mentioned earlier neglect, right? So
Right.
where do we draw that line, and have we created a society where appropriate child rearing is called neglect? My son jokes and says, I'm going to call Child Protective Services, right?
Right.
Because you made him pick
Well,
up a piece of paper off the floor.
right. Right. Yeah, it's one of the issues that I think we've raised a generation that, well, first of all, they don't know how to talk to strangers. They don't know how to navigate, because we have convinced them that the world is a scary place, that they have to have an adult to help them navigate. We're not giving them enough independence. And the frightening thing for us as parents is, it's scary to give them independence, because they may make the wrong decision. They very well could make um, really bad decisions. I having worked with kids from traumatic backgrounds, I joke with my friends that I know nothing about babies, because I've not had any biological kids. I've never fostered babies. Uh, I used to
They're
tell my brother
messy.
and sister, well, eh, and my personality is such, they're boring until they can argue with me. So so
That happens relatively early, by the way, but go
right,
ahead.
right, right.
Yeah,
But
if you're called
teenagers,
trying to put your child to sleep, or
that's
wanting your child
right.
to sleep in a separate room, then
And they're
you know
negotiating.
they're
Right.
before they can
That's right.
talk, they're arguing with you.
That's right. But with teenagers, I've had question. I've had every conversation ranging from, no, I'm not going to bail you out of jail tonight. We'll talk in the morning, to, who is this strange man in my house at midnight? Um, and because they just make stupid decisions.
Right,
But you can't stop them. You can't
right,
protect them. I mean, to some extent you can.
right.
I have often said that raising kids it's a lot like being on a roller coaster. You can't direct it. All you can do is just make sure the lap belt is down and that the safety bars are on, and you
Don't
just
raise
hang
your hands
on.
going through the tunnel.
That's right. That's right.
Yes.
So,
All right. Well, we're going to go to a quick commercial break. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about the specifics of your work as an attorney and as an advisor and as a prosecutor, and glean some learnings there as well. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of Debbie Ausburn.
Middle Tree got started by a group of educators who wanted to see education done in a different way.
Socioeconomic status is the primary factor in whether a person is admitted to college at present. And we think that that is simply, well, unfair. And so our mission is to work against that by allowing people from less privileged backgrounds access to the tools that people from more privileged backgrounds are able to have.
The programs that we offer here are tutoring, college counseling, ACT and SAT test prep, and our summer seed program. The tutoring program is unlike any other on the planet that I'm aware of, in that we allow students to be here on a membership basis. Students can come as often as they'd like to without an appointment, and they can be here for as long as they want to.
I really like helping kids understand things that they have been told that they're not good at.
In 6th grade, that's when I noticed my grades started to go up, especially in math. That's usually where I need my help.
I prefer to be able to just have fun with the kids in a way that inspires them to want to learn more and to have fun while they're learning.
The way they do it here, they just have that vibe, you know? If they make it fun.
We don't have a system here. We don't have a workbook. We don't have an actual program. We have individual students, and we approach each and every individual student as individuals.
I love to go finish my homework so I can go home, chill, and just play video games or something like that.
What Middle Tree did for me was it gave me back my time after dinner or before dinner to do things with my son that let me be mom. It gave me back my mom time.
I came here and I finished the year with a B in math, which came up from an F, which I totally think is because of this place. I had A's and B's completely.
We really want to make sure that we're reaching people on their levels.
If you don't understand something, they will help you until you feel comfortable with it.
I like to empower my students to use their voices.
They want you to ask questions, and they want you to learn better than you ever did before.
Really, all we really want are for our kids to be healthy and happy, and I think Middle Tree embraces each kid being their best self, being their individualized self.
Obviously, a great organization. We've had the founder, Joe Atman, on our show. Something to look into if you're in one of those lucky states that has Middle Tree. They have some state contracts in California, Arizona, and a few others. Anyway, we're back here now with Debbie Ausburn. And right before the break, we were talking about a lot about giving children the space to grow and the room to grow and also to make mistakes. Let's talk now about adult mistakes, right? The mistakes that some of those caregivers have made and the advice that you're giving and how you're using maybe even tell us a little bit about the transition from just a social worker, just a foster parent, as if those weren't enough, right? Or important enough or whatever, to then go and get a law degree. How did that come about? What's up with that?
Well, like I said, I burned out being a social worker, caseworker. And I'd always enjoyed debate in college, and so sort of just gravitated to the skill set of arguing, but also the intellectual challenge of thinking things through and figuring things out and getting my facts together. And so I really enjoyed that. And then when I graduated, I joke, I have career ADD. I've done several different jobs as a lawyer. And I worked
Well,
for
I
a
was gonna
couple of
say probably
nonprofits.
there was even maybe some burnout because you were also a prosecutor for a while, and then you mentioned emptying the ocean with a teaspoon.
Right. Well, I actually enjoyed being a prosecutor because unlike being a caseworker, when I was a prosecutor, when the jury's verdict was back, my job was done. I didn't have to work on picking up the pieces. I could prosecute child abuse cases and put the bad guy in jail, and then I was on to the next one. I wasn't still providing therapy or any of the other things that at
Is
least
that
for
is that an
me it
area
was.
you probably can't talk about specific cases, but is that an area where generally the bad guy does go to jail?
This was back in the 90s. It was more challenging then, where now I think the pendulum has swung to where um, people believe kids more than they did back when I was prosecuting. It was harder to get convictions based just on one person's word against another. The pendulum was starting to swing, um, and it was swinging while I was it was moving while I was prosecuting. There was a big difference between when I started in '92 and when I ended in '99, but um, it 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 it, it was more difficult then, I think, than it is today. So. Um, there it took a lot of work, and it was not a simple um there were other prosecutions that were more simple, I guess, would be the way to phrase it. um so I did that for a while, and then came back into private practice. My mom had a stroke. I needed to move back home. I was working in North Carolina, and I needed to come back home and help take care of mom. And my brother and sister were raising children without my advice, and I knew that was going to go badly. So I I came home. I was actually a foster parent while I was a prosecutor, and while I was between law school and moving back home to Georgia. I worked in Virginia and North Carolina, and I was a foster parent in those states. And then moved back to Georgia. One of my foster daughters, long term, moved with me. She had aged out of the system, so she moved with me, and I was working in private practice, and that's where I found myself drawn to working with youth organizations because of all of my experience in working with kids. I did a lot of defending childcare centers and camps and other groups when they would get sued for letting staff members or other kids victimize someone. So I would get hired by the insurance company to defend those cases and either try them or settle them. And and then somewhere in there, I fell in love and got married. That was almost 20 years ago that I when I embarked on that journey of being a step parent. And my husband and I have done some foster care, and now we are at the season of our life where we're mentoring. I work with an organization that puts mentors together with kids who have aged out of the foster system, and they've aged out without any family connections. And so we are still somewhat involved, but because they're adults, I have less responsibility for them. So.
Yeah. Well, we're going to engage more fully with the audience questions in a little bit, but let me throw one out here that I was wondering about as well. This is from Grace. How do judges weigh child testimony? Just never had any experience with that.
Well, actually, judges don't. It's juries who weigh it. Judges very rarely have to make decisions about credibility of kids. They just decide whether the evidence comes in or not. Um, Juries nowadays are more believing of children. They tend to listen to what a child says. Prosecutors are more sophisticated now about explaining to juries, and have a lot of experts who can explain that with kids, trauma responses and lying can look very much alike. So when kids disclose abuse, for example, if their world falls in on them, they may back up and change their story and recant because they want the world to go back the way it was. Um, so there's a much, much deeper and more sophisticated understanding of kids' testimony in these cases than there ever was before. So, and that was one of the things I learned both as a prosecutor and as a foster parent. Um, I would hear stories from my kids a little bit at a time. You know, they would tell a little bit. If the world didn't fall in on them, they would tell a little bit more. And um, And then sometimes I had kids who had told their story and it, um, they started milking it and exaggerating a little bit. So, I had to deal with the getting back away from um, away from them playing the victim card and back into um, this does not have to define the rest of your life. This, we can move you beyond this.
Well, let's spend a minute on that because we talked about privilege early on in the show. My own experience, I mentioned the tent, but of course, I mentioned the high-speed chase. But other things like being kidnapped as a child, in a domestic kidnapping, smuggled out of the
Mm,
country, separated from both parents for 2 years. Case went to the Supreme Court of Sweden. But there was neglect. There was an alcoholic mother. There was that loss. A whole lot of things that led me to have a little bit of a victim complex.
oh
Because
yeah,
guess what? I
yeah.
was a victim
Hmm.
compared to, the slow unfolding train wreck. This is one of the most horrifying moments in my life, right? So, we've been separated from from my mother for 2.5 years. Mom won custody back at the Supreme Court level of Sweden by convincing the judge that we would have a better two-parent family with her because she paraded this guy she met in a bar who was her new husband. Um, and she managed to stay sober, for a week or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, but she started drinking on the plane ride home. And so when she picked us up in Sweden, we vacationed in England for, 3 or 4 days on the way home. And that's when their sham marriage already began to fall apart. And so my mom started drinking on the way home in the plane. And by the time the plane landed on the tarmac in Canada to the waiting family and press that was there to celebrate, Mother Bear bringing her bear cubs home after 2.5 year international court battle, she was so drunk she couldn't get down the thing to the tarmac and she became belligerent. And then we had to be paraded in front of reporters. And I remember this one particularly horrible picture where we're on the front page of this newspaper smiling and I could see in my own eyes this get me the hell out of here kind of thing.
Right, right.
So, you know, the moment where I realized I had to, it was my choice to be a victim or not. Right. And it's subtle. It's subtle. And the more you were a victim, the more nobody wants to tell that to the victim is you got to get over being a victim because they are a victim. We're not taking away that they were victimized,
Right.
but you must choose not to remain a victim at some point.
Right.
And I'm not saying it's easy, good,
Oh no.
right, fair, anything,
No.
but I don't see any other path forward. And I'm not a psychologist, but I don't see any other path forward to true healing, but to recognize you must overcome being a victim instead of exploiting being a victim. Playing the victim card doesn't help you.
No. And that's one of the biggest problems with it from my perspective is it leaves my kids mired in their victimhood and doesn't help them out of it. And it's hard enough to get beyond being a victim, even with encouragement and help and support. So the last thing they need is encouragement to stay where they are,
Right.
and to
But isn't there
explore
a
their
lot of
victimhood.
enablement? Isn't there a lot of people who want to exploit victims?
Oh yeah, yeah.
So isn't it sick actually that victims are being exploited
Well,
in their
like
victimhood by becoming the poster child for some cause that since
hmm
they're a victim we can now exploit their it's not the victim playing the victim card, it's somebody else playing the victim's victim card for
for
some
them.
bigger altruistic reason.
Well, like you're being paraded in front of all the reporters. The reporters Everybody wanted a piece of you. The reporters wanted their story, you know.
Well,
Your
and that
mom
wasn't
wanted her
even but that
vindication,
wasn't
but
even playing the victim card, right? They were wanting to celebrate the victory, and I was still a victim. But I'm kind of talking about the inverse of the political exploitation of people who have been victimized
yeah,
by
and
keeping them a victim and keeping the fact that they are a victim in the forefront.
as they're defining, and that I
Exactly.
think is the problem. My sister, who has worked with a lot of kids in her job as a school counselor, gave me a phrase that I think was incredibly powerful, which is saying to kids, "This does not have to define you."
Yeah.
And that's the thing that, all of us are many types of people. I'm a mother and a lawyer and a sister and any number of things. Um and our kids have many facets to their personality, and we need to help them think of themselves as artistic or musical or sports or whatever, rather than victim being the first thing that they think of. And it's hard. We have to do it gently because we can't, the analogy I like to use with our kids is when somebody has a broken leg, we don't tell them to just run it off and take another lap. We put them in a cast, we put them on crutches, we give them what they need. But if we leave them in that cast, then
Yeah,
um,
unless you are part of the medical industrial pharmacological complex, you don't want them to stay in that cast the rest of their life.
exactly, exactly. They will lose use of that limb if we leave them
Right,
in that cast.
right.
So, yes, that I think has always been the biggest challenge for me as a parent, is to be able to say to my kids, I hear you, I see you, I am sorry you went through that, um, and I love you, I care about you, and it's time to get up and go to school. Or,
Yeah,
it, life goes on and you really need to get on with it.
yeah,
So I remember one of my kids, I was having conversation about, you're 16, life is coming at you, and this particular kid was pushing back and saying, "He's giving me a lot of anxiety." And I finally said, "Look, I feel like we're having this conversation where I'm telling you, you're sitting on a train track and there's a train coming down the track. And what you're telling me is talking about trains gives you anxiety."
right,
Well,
right,
I'm sorry it gives you anxiety, but there is a train coming down the track.
right, right.
I, I can't stop it. Can
Yeah,
can we at least work together to get you off the track?
right, right. It's a slow motion train, but a train nonetheless.
Right, right, exactly.
All right. Well, we're going to go to one more commercial break, Debbie, if I can, if you're willing to stay on for a few minutes, because I want to
Oh,
interact with the
sure.
audience. But I want to get to this break because the break is actually for the camp programs that we run and the Royal Falcon Foundation that I founded. So
Okay.
I think in the context of this, and having mentioned, I've never mentioned this before, but guess what? It's expensive to have to provide the legal guardrails, and then if you make a mistake, it's expensive to have to pay the reparations for
Yes.
something that maybe wasn't even something you did. So
Yep.
let's go ahead and run this commercial break in this context, and when we come back, we'll engage with the audience comments. Don't go
Okay.
anywhere.
Welcome to the Royal Falcon Foundation. Our curriculum and activities inspire and train adolescents through hands-on experiences, fostering growth and empowerment. Through immersive and challenging experiences, we shape young minds to think independently and develop their leadership skills. Our programs foster new friendships and unity, shaping young leaders to tackle real-world challenges with confidence. We believe in equipping the next generation with the skills to become leaders of tomorrow. Join us at the Royal Falcon Foundation and be part of a journey that empowers, unites, and inspires. Double your impact with our matching grant. Until the end of 2025, every tax-deductible donation to the Royal Falcon Foundation up to $1,000 will be matched dollar for dollar. Visit our website to donate now or email info@royalfalconfoundation.org for more details. Together, we can make a greater difference.
One of the learnings coming out of that experience we had was moving away from week-long camps with overnights to day camps. Simple, necessary, given the circumstances. Avoids a whole, predictable, preventable, right? We never had any real issues or real problems, but the fact that we had that one little one around the workman's comp issue was enough to say the last thing we want is to expose ourselves. So we've got a program called Soul Seeds, in which we do raised bed gardens. We build raised bed gardens, and that helps ground these young people and build a community around the idea that you have to care for these plants, and you're learning about sustainability and et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, so before we move on to the audience comments, what did we forget to cover? What do you want to typically share from your experiences, either as a parent of other people's children's, or an author, an advocate, and an influencer, and an educator?
Well, I think that the message I always give folks is raising other people's children is challenging. It is the most difficult and challenging thing I've ever done in my life, but it is also the most rewarding. And I would not change any of even the heartbreaks have made me a much better person. And I always like to challenge people. Not everyone can be a foster parent. I think there's a role for the church in supporting foster families because it does take a village. No one can handle traumatized kids by themselves. They have to be part of a network.
And I think so.
Yeah.
Sorry to jump in here, but social services, government programs, necessary in today's world, but I don't think they take the place of volunteer efforts, right? People that genuinely
cannot love a child,
right? Yeah, but the problem is volunteers are, don't have necessarily the resources for all the legal and all the issues and challenges and threats of, no good deed goes unpunished, it seems these days.
Right. No, I firmly agree. And so you need to band together in order to make that happen. One of the things that I hear people say all the time about our child welfare system is that it's broken because it doesn't do a good job taking care of people. And my response is, no, it's not broken. It does what systems do. Systems protect themselves. And so it protects itself. And sometimes kids get lost in the process.
That is so profound, right? We also, it's self-preservation, and when it gets applied to a soulless system, there's no awareness. There's no possibility of awareness that that's what's happening.
Right. I in my profession, there's a licensing agency that I do a lot of work with, and I say to them from time to time, you are wonderful, genuine, caring people who get together and collectively do evil things to my clients. It's just the alchemy of bureaucracy. I can't explain it, but so there is a room for folks to come around and support and help a lot of fractured families and a lot of kids. So that's always my challenge is there's a place to help and to be part of that network. And look, if a left-thinking, empathy-challenged lawyer can be a foster parent, then anybody can do it.
Amen. So a number of the questions here, I think you've answered, how many children have you raised? Well, there's a huge variety there, right? There are some that you raised over a longer period of time.
Right.
Many perhaps you can't even count if you didn't keep a log of the
I
different
didn't keep
short-term.
track.
Yeah. I was in a short-term orphanage interim home kind of thing. And, there were kids coming and going in the 3 months I was there.
Hmm.
And it was in a family home, right?
Right, right. So there are 7 kids that I claim as part of the family, 2 long-term foster kids, and then my husband's 5 kids.
Another question from Higgins here. Troubled kids. Did you ever get them to turn around? Is there maybe one little story or vignette you want to share?
Oh yeah, I've seen kids do amazing things, and I don't know that I ever got them to turn around. I'm not sure that I deserve any of the praise for it. I just gave them a safe place to grow up and explore. One of my foster daughters is she finished her master's degree while she was pregnant with her second child, and I think actually she finished it with a newborn. Um, and she's just done amazing things. And she was highly at risk, but came from a very fractured family, into the system, kind of bounced around, and she's just so I've seen kids just really do amazing things. I've got some friends who came through the system. One of my good friends who works with us on some of the online courses we have. She's an alumnus of the foster care system, and now is a foster parent and a therapist. So um, people have amazing depths of resiliency if we can just figure out how to tap into it.
Thank you. Here's another question from Grace, actually, and I want to dig into this because I think you mentioned in passing, maybe anecdotally or even as a joke, about the original sin. But what I want to dig into here is your personal religious views in the context of being an attorney and a social worker, and in a country where there's been, culture wars around the role of religion, the legality of religion in state affairs and all this. How do you navigate that, and what's your take on that issue?
Well, my personal religious beliefs, I guess, conservative Protestant is probably the best way to describe it without getting into a lot of detail. I'm Bapto Presbyterian, married an Anglican to discuss denominations. Um, but I actually have done work. One of my nonprofit stints was doing some religious freedom work. So I'm very strong on the First Amendment, free speech, and the ability to say what you want. I'm really highly opposed to the whole cancel culture on left or right. I think our um, speech protections are incredibly important for a democracy, and I think that, religious people, um, I've often said that our society treats religion sort of like they do people having exotic animals as pets, which is if you take it out in public, make sure you keep it on a leash and that it's well behaved. Um, and I'm too much of a free speech purist to believe that only well-behaved people deserve protection. I,
Yeah.
I like
Well, yeah.
the
If I may throw in an analogy here,
yeah.
because you mentioned earlier the uh, oh, what was it? Um, go ahead. Sorry, it'll come back to me. Now that
That's
I've
okay.
thrown you off, right? Sorry.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not even sure
Well,
where I was going with that.
the
Oh,
exotic pet analogy was awesome, but it has to do with the muzzling. I know what it was. It was the difference between a mentor and a groomer. And I thought of the
right,
analogy of gun control, right? Because these gun control laws, the argument against them is, yeah, all the law-abiding people follow it. So all the mentors will be careful, but the groomers just come in and exploit the method
right, right.
that is
They they they,
outlined,
they find the loopholes,
right? And
and
so the religious people, if the rules begin to be set up that you got to keep that pet on a leash, you know the religious people are doing that even while those with opposing ideas get more and more loud.
right, right. And we have to be out um, in the culture, if we're going to, you know, it- Christ said, "Be salt and light." That means we have to get out in the culture
Right.
if we're going to serve the widow and the orphan. And so, I'm a strong believer that religion does have a place um, in, in our society, and that if it's something that you can only do at home, then it 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 deprives our entire society of a very important um, source of power, and that we should be able to um, take our religion with us wherever we go. Now, that also means that we have a responsibility to to learn how to discuss things in a calm, respectful manner, and uh, that's be wise as serpents and harmless as doves.
Right.
Um,
Well,
is
again, all of those
also
things
a
are in
command,
there, right? And all of the
right?
religious people should and will hopefully honor them, but when others then don't, um, right? So religion is the practice of belief. It's the application of beliefs. Religion is not necessarily the belief itself, right? That might be doctrine, but
Right.
religion is maybe something different. My point in calling that out is that a new moral code has been established, right? Where this aspect of morality is either put in the background or submerged, and some other aspect of morality is raised to high heaven, right? The issue of tolerance becoming perhaps one of the biggest moral code issues. And then the caricature is painted that everybody's tolerant except religious people. They are the intolerant. And then that caricature gets established, gets adopted, gets agreed upon. And even religious people then have to almost sort of go along with the idea that they are the intolerant ones and they are not tolerated because they are not the tolerant ones. And the hypocrisy is mind boggling. And yet,
Right.
people get into this cognitively dissonant stance, and for somebody who has eyes to see, the cognitive dissonance is at sound barrier breaking levels. It's so loud, so overpowering, and yet one may not have the words to articulate what it is that is screaming in one's ear.
Yeah, and we find ourselves going to one of two extremes of one is apologizing for our beliefs and becoming timid about it because we don't want to offend people. And the other extreme is we don't really care about offending people, and we become very belligerent about it. I don't think either one is effective. You
Well,
just
simple statements that used to be for which statements that are not in any way wrong and it used to be acceptable, like hate the sin, love the sinner, right? Love the sin, Love the sinner, hate the sin. But even the idea of a sinner, right? You can't have the idea of a sinner today.
No,
The problem when
no,
that statement is the word sinner, even though there's
right,
nothing wrong with the statement, because objectively there is such a thing as sin, if you will. We can define it as missing the mark, right?
right.
Failing to do the right thing. Objectively, there is something called sin. Now, maybe there's baggage with the word, but still, the statement, love the sinner, hate the sin, I still believe that's true.
Well, I think that's what God calls us to. But you're right. Sin is very charged. I have learned, particularly with younger generation, when we're talking about things in the Bible, rather than saying, well, God says this is a sin, because they don't hear anything I say
Right.
after that. I say, well, actually, the Bible is sort of an owner's manual. It's the manufacturer's recommended procedures. It's the book by the manufacturer of the world of how things work best and how you will be happiest and how you can live your best life. It's sort of saying the same thing, but it comes in on a different wavelength for that generation.
Oh, absolutely. One has to adapt the language for sure. Anyway, Debbie, what else in the last minutes you want to leave the audience with? What, how should they get in touch with you or your books?
Well,
If you want them to.
yeah, they can go to debbieausburn.com, or just go to Amazon, Raising Other People's Children or Protecting Other People's Children.
I'm just putting it in the chat here.
Yep. It may require www.debbieausburn.com. I
Sure.
keep trying to get my domain host to make it not agnostic on the www, but I haven't
Well, if you Google
succeeded
it,
in
it'll
that
come up,
yet.
right?
Right. Yep, it will.
Exactly. So, Debbie, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've learned a lot. I know the audience has. You're incredibly well-spoken, gracious. Um, one last audience comment from Leah. Debbie is a calm speaker, but it's a good calm. It's a good calm, and I guess in this kind of space, it's an important calm. It's a healthy calm.
Well, you learn to let kids bounce off of you, and that
Yeah.
is there's a lot of stories that have gotten me to that level of serenity.
Some you can tell, and some you can't.
They're in my book.
Wonderful. Well, there's a lot more of Debbie then in protecting other children, other people's children, or raising other people's children. So thank you, Debbie, for being on the show. I have about one task left, and that's to share this sneak peek of next week's show with our audience. If you aren't in a rush, I'd love to just chat with you for a minute afterwards. You can stick around. Otherwise, I can reach out later if you have to go. But for the audience, we're now signing off. Please do, though, stick around. We've got an amazing guest coming next week as well. Until then, may God be with you. Hey, everyone. This is your host, Homer Franson. Actually, Wade Franson, but I have a yellowish skin color here because we're doing a special Holy Day episode about a very unique little gem created by Brian Rossman. Did you know that there's a Jewish component to The Simpsons? Well, there is, and we're going to have a special Holy Day episode talking about that with Brian, who is the founder of the Homer Calendar, now in its 26th year. Welcome to the studio, Brian.
Thanks so much, Wade. I'm really looking forward to our discussion.
So what is the Homer Calendar?
So it's a guide to the counting of the Omer, which is a Jewish observance between Passover and the Feast of Weeks, Shavuot in Hebrew. There's a biblical ordinance to count the 49 days, the 7 weeks leading up to the between the holidays, people may be familiar with Pentecost, which is based on the same idea. So that's called counting the Omer, but I do it as counting the Homer, as in Homer Simpson. So it's a joke about the Simpsons TV show. It's probably one joke taken way too far, but it's all about Jewish content on the Simpsons show, and having Homer Simpson sort of be part of this observance.
Well, and I have it up on my screen here, and it's all yellow, and it's wonderful. That's what's giving me this Homer Simpson-esque skin tone in that light. And this year, given the confluence of different calendars, the Hebrew calendar, it just so happens that Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, is happening on the eve of the 1st and 2nd of June, which are the twin birthdays of my sister and I, and it has a special significance to me. Who knows in the divine comedy of things how this convergence happens? But I am honored to have connected with you, to go deep into the geekiness of what the counting of Omer is and the humor of the Simpsons and that Jewish element. So where does this, you were in Israel when you began realizing there was a connection here, and watching it with your children. Just tell us a little bit about that time in the early to mid 90s.
Well, we were living in Israel with my wife, who is there she's a rabbi. She was there for an educational fellowship. And I was looking for some American culture to show my daughter, who was then 5 years old and 6 years old those years. And The Simpsons was on Israeli TV in English. It was a way to expose her to some English, and it was funny, and we would laugh and laugh together. And it was helpful for my Hebrew. And then years later, I heard about this joke, counting the Homer, and it just flashed on me. I could create a website. And I was a little geeky about creating websites in those years too. And so I did it for myself. It's a joke for myself, but lots of people have loved it over the decades. And so I keep doing it year after year.
Well, we're going to mine this little pun, this joke that you say has gone on for too long, over the course of a full hour. But it will be deep and rich because, after all, we live in a nation that is known to have a Judeo-Christian heritage. And so these connections and the way that this is integrated into the Simpsons TV show, the longest running cartoon show in history, we will be diving deep into the implications of all of this in the Created in the Image of God show, Building Vibrant Communities. You are not going to want to miss the special Holy Day episode of Created in the Image of God with Brian Rossman. We'll see you there.